In Becky Chambers' new novel, A Prayer for the Crown Shy, she imagines a future world where humanity actually learns from its mistakes. Can you imagine? It's science fiction, but not the post-apocalyptic kind. It's the world gets better kind, from creation care and sustainability to true openness and completely reimagined economic systems. This is actually the second I guess it's a sequel to the first. So if you're gonna go buy this, buy the first one first. It's called, what is it called? A Psalm for the Wild Built, Becky Chambers. Anyway, I won't give any spoilers away, but at one point the main character, Dex, is explaining the system of payment that humanity has now, far in the future, to their new robot friend, Moscap. I told you it was sci-fi, right? So I'm going to read you the passage. It's a few pages long, but it's fun, so enjoy. Yeah, Dex said, they're PEBs and the accounts that they're coming from. This elicited no response from Moscap. It's a way of tracking exchanges of goods and services. Oh, Moscap said. It looked at the paper with interest. This is money? No, Dex said quickly. They didn't know a ton about money, but they knew enough about the concept from their days in school to reject the comparison. Well, I mean, it's a sort of payment, I guess, but it's not, what's the word, capital. They ran a hand through their hair. They'd never had to explain PEBs before. Okay, anytime you receive anything that involves some sort of craft or work or labor or whatever from someone else, you give them PEBs in exchange. So let's say you start out with 0 PEBs, which is true for me, says Moscap. Yes, let's also say you go to a farmer and get an apple, and let's say that's worth 1 PEB to you. What would I do with an apple? Just pretend you can eat apples. All right. Okay, you take the apple and you give the farmer 1 PEB. How? Moscap asked. I'll explain later, Dex said. Stick with the farmer for now. If you say so, Moscap's eyes shifted in thought. I currently have 1 hypothetical apple and -1 hypothetical PEBs. Right. The farmer's work has benefited you, so now you need to provide something to benefit someone else. To the farmer, you mean? No, Dex tried to explain. It can be the farmer, if you provide something the farmer wants, but exchanging PEBs isn't about bartering, it's about benefit. You are a part of the community, and the farmer is doing something for you, means that they are effectively doing something for the group. So you've got your -1 PEB balance now, you've got to fill it up. Let's say that you're, a musician. You go play some music in a town square and 5 people come to listen. They now give you some PEBs. If they each give you 2 PEBs, now you've got 9 PEBs, which you can exchange for other things. Make sense? I believe so, Moscap said. You're saying that instead of a system of currency that tracks individual trade, you have one that facilitates exchange through the community, because all exchange benefits the community as a whole? Exactly. Do people give you PEBs for tea? Yes. And then you give them PEBs for food or supplies or whatever. Moscap's head whirred softly. The farmer feeds the musician who brings music to the village. It paused, the whirring growing louder. The technician who took a break to enjoy the music now has the energy to go fix the communications tower. The communications tower enables the meteorologist to deliver the weather report, which helps the farmer to grow more apples. I see, the robot nodded. And I'm not penalized for the debt I incurred at the start? Absolutely not, Dex said firmly. We don't do that. Or we don't do that anymore, I guess. God's Around history class was a long time ago. Nobody should be barred from necessities or comforts just because they don't have the right number next to their name. Moscap nodded again at their explanation. But if there's no penalty for debt, what's to stop you from taking without giving back? It's a bad feeling, Dex said. Everybody has a negative balance from time to time for lots of reasons. That's fine. That's part of the ebb and flow. But if someone had a huge negative, well, that says they need help. Maybe they're sick or stuck. Maybe they've got something going on at home, or maybe it's just one of those times when they need other people to carry them for a while. That's okay. Everybody ends up there sometimes. If I saw a friend's balance and it was way in the red, I'd make a point of checking in. You can see other people's balances? Yeah, of course, it's all public. Does that not get competitive? Dex squinted. Why would it? I'll stop there, but I know you all want to go buy the books now. If that vision seems like a fantasy from where we all sit, just wait until you hear Luke's vision, where the status of the rich and poor are effectively reversed, right? From Mary's song in the first chapter of Luke's gospel that praises a God who has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly, who has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty, to Jesus' blessings over the poor and hungry and excluded, and his woes to the rich, the full, the well thought of in the Beatitudes, to Luke's description of the Christ followers after Pentecost in Acts 2. He says, all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. He's not as specific as Becky Chambers, but Luke talks about using wealth in a really different way than his culture, than our culture, right? Both of them help us to imagine an alternative to the system of dishonest wealth, as Luke calls it, that we live and breathe in. It's so hard to see the corruption of our economic system when it's all that we know, right? I think our lack of imagination is one reason that the parable we read from Luke 16 today is so notoriously difficult, so weird to us. Is it the dishonest manager, or is it the faithful steward, or is it the shrewd and wise manager? Different Bible translations give this section of text wildly different headings, you'll notice. If we think that our system of wealth and employment and poverty and debt is fair, or is just the way it is, then when we read this story, we see a boss, a middle manager, and people indebted to the boss, right? The middle manager is bad at his job, gets notice of his termination, and proceeds to burn things down on his way out, trying to gain some future favors by relieving portions of debts owed at the boss's expense. How is that fair? Why is this guy praised? You have to pay your debts, right? It's the moral thing to do, and you have to be honest and hardworking and bring value to the bottom line at work, right? It's the right thing to do. Is it always? Jesus invites us to rethink our assumptions with this tricky parable. It's kind of funny that we all say the Lord's Prayer together, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Well, we don't always say debts and debtors, we sometimes say trespasses, and that's a whole other interesting story that we will save for later. And yet, our first impulse when we read this parable is often to think that the manager is dishonest for forgiving debts, the thing that we pray that we ourselves will do. From whose perspective do we judge honesty? Honesty in his dealings with his boss, or honesty in his dealings with impoverished debtors? In our culture, we tend to accept the morality of the haves, right, over the have-nots. Maybe because deep down we think that since they're doing well, they must be blessed. Maybe because those of us in the middle hope to climb our way up toward more security, more comfort. So we identify with the rich and we strive to be like them. But in Luke's gospel, when a rich character enters the scene, we should hear Billie Eilish in the background providing their entry music. I'm the bad guy, right? Duh. Okay, there's only a few of you who are there, but it's for you. It's for you, Milo. The rich man here is the landowner, and the rich landowners were known to be loan sharks. He kept his status as wealthy and powerful by keeping his less well-off neighbors in debt. He likely charged exorbitant interest that made even small loans grow to unmanageable proportions, keeping his debtors under his thumb, keeping payments coming well past when the principal was paid, making him more wealthy and more powerful without having to do anything, right? That's why he's got a manager. And it's not as if the neighbors had a choice in the matter. They've got to live, and this is how the system works. They work hard their whole lives with little comfort, and the landowner's money just grows on its own. It's a completely unjust system. Does it sound familiar? Anyone? The money and power should grow on its own as long as the rich guy has a good manager taking care of things. And in our story, apparently he doesn't. The boss gets word that the manager is squandering his property, mismanaging the estate. And there's nothing in the story that tells us whether these accusations are true, but he's fired regardless. The manager has relied on the rich man for his security, for his place of some status in the world. He's been living a more comfortable life than the impoverished neighbors of his. But when the goodwill of the rich man runs out, he's left with nothing. I'm not strong enough for manual labor, and I'm ashamed to beg, he thinks to himself. He's out of options. So he makes a radical choice. He's been aspiring up to benefit from and be like the rich man, but now he's got to aspire down to think from the perspective of and rely on the hospitality of those who are lower than him in the cultural and economic hierarchy. Before he turns in his books, he goes to each of his boss's debtors and starts slashing their debt. You owe 100, make it 50. You owe 80, make it 60. His hope is that if he does these favors for his neighbors, they'll take him in and help him now that he's out of a job, now that he's destitute. So far, so good, right? The weird part of the story is when the boss finds out and commends the manager for being shrewd or wise. And then the moral of the story from Jesus is to be like the dishonest manager. Scholars and pastors are so uncomfortable with this that we tend to work ourselves into exegetical frenzies trying to make it make sense. Maybe the manager is just slashing off his commission on the debts and not actually reducing the wealth of his boss. Unlikely, right? Or maybe the forgiven parts represent the accrued interest on the original loans. It's possible. If that's the case, the manager is actually helping his boss get back in line with covenant expectations, in which charging interest is forbidden by God's law. Maybe. Or maybe this is all about self-preservation. Maybe the manager was falsely accused and is sticking it to the man on the way out. We actually have no idea about his motives or the particulars, and I'm not sure that they really matter, because the point is that the system is rigged, right? The economy is unjust. The rich man stays rich by burying others in debt. The middle manager conspires with the rich man by doing his bidding in an attempt to climb up the ladder until the ladder is kicked out from under him, as it so often is. And he has to find another way to survive. Jesus highlights, in case we didn't get it, Jesus highlights the evils of this economic system by referring to wealth as mammon 3 times in his post-parable exhortations. We don't get it in our NRSV translation, but I think it shows up in the KJV and in others. Mammon is the name, the term used to personify wealth as an evil power, as a bad influence, as a false idol. Make friends for yourself by means of unjust mammon, he says. And if you've not been faithful with unjust mammon, who will trust you with true wealth? And then you cannot serve God and mammon, right? So the question becomes, if wealth in itself is unjust, if the whole system is unfair, what does it mean to be faithful? In this case, faithfulness to God looks a lot like unfaithfulness to the system. It looks like using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. It looks like changing our perspective on whose rules we are following, whose perspective on fairness we are privileging. Are we being faithful to the landowner's interests or to the interests of those he is oppressing? This is exactly the shift that the creators of the organization RIP Medical Debt made. More than 4 in 10 American households owe medical debt, so that's a lot of us, statistically. The rate is much higher for people who are Black, Latinx, or who have low income. Yuki Noguchi reports on NPR's Morning Edition that RIP Medical Debt set out to change that by buying up debt on secondary markets, where hospitals sell debt for pennies on the dollar to companies that profit when they collect on that debt. They don't offer that debt to the people who owe it. They offer it to big companies who then make a profit on it. RIP Medical Debt buys the debts just like any other collection company would, except instead of trying to profit, they send out notices to consumers saying that their debt has been cleared. You should look this up and hear some of the stories around this. To date, RIP Medical Debt has purchased $6.7 billion with the B, $billion in unpaid debt, and relieved 3.6 million people of their debt. The group says that retiring $100 in debt costs about $1. The system is unjust, right? The best part, though, is that it's a model developed by 2 former debt collectors, Craig Antico and Jerry Ashton, who built their careers chasing down patients who couldn't pay their bills. They would have conversations with them on the phone, and they would understand and have better insights into the struggles that people were going through. Eventually, they realized that they were in a unique position to help people, so they switched perspectives. They switched gears from debt collection to philanthropy. As a bill collector, collecting millions of dollars in medical-associated bills in my career, now, all of a sudden, I'm reformed, Ashton said. I'm a predatory giver. What does it mean to be just in an unjust system? We have to be able to imagine something different and see the economic systems that we swim in not just as the way things are, but as unjust, evil influences that are false idols to be upended as mammon, right? Then we can stop trying to play by their rules, we can stop serving them, and we can be shrewd and wise. We can start working the system in ways that serve God instead. And this isn't just about money, this is about all areas of our lives. Whose rules are we playing by? Ask yourself. The people that created from and benefit from the system, from the rules, or the people who are harmed by them? Whose perspective are we taking? Make friends for yourself by means of unjust mammon, Jesus says, so that when it is gone, and it will be gone someday, count on that, the friends that you've made may welcome you into eternal homes. When wealth is gone, whether in this life or in the next, your community will still be there. That is the gospel news. And you will be responsible to them for whose justice you served. And your community will be or will not be your salvation. For the manager, security was found in friendship with neighbors whose oppression he once participated in. Security meant switching teams. Next week, we're going to read about another rich man, who also gets the Billie Eilish intro, who ignored the needs of his poor neighbor Lazarus, and in the afterlife looked to Lazarus for salvation, but it was too late. He could have used his wealth to make Lazarus a friend instead of a beggar, but he didn't, and now he doesn't have a friend to make him into an eternal home. We are called to be a part of God's economy, sharing wealth and upending unjust systems, reversing the existing order of things, as Luke loves to come back to again and again. Not only because it's the good and benevolent thing to do, it is, but because our own salvation is tied up in it. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, the unjust mammon, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? Jesus asks. It's budget season here at UBC, so I can't help but thinking about our church budget and our church assets when I read this. Are we using our wealth to contribute to or to dismantle unjust systems? Are we serving it as a false idol, or are we being shrewd and wise and making it work for us in our calling to serve God and neighbor? God intends that wealth, material wealth, be shared in such a way that no one is in need. This intention is clear from the laws of ancient Israel to the gospel of Jesus Christ to the countercultural economic system in the very first Pentecost community. If we as a church can't be faithful to God with the money that isn't even ours, faithful to God, that is, not to the money, what makes us think that God will give us more? What makes us think God will entrust us with more? Jesus wraps up his commentary on the parable like this: no slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth, God and mammon. Okay, it's a problem that Jesus employs slavery in a story without also condemning it. I'm just going to name that and not try to solve it right here at the end of the sermon. But the point is, we can serve the system of wealth that says we should always aspire upward, that we should find our security in the accumulation of money and power, the system that our morality and systems of justice are put into place to uphold, or we can serve God. We can't do both. That's Jesus' point. If we look like good, upstanding participants in a capitalist system that relies on predatory debt and unfettered wealth accumulation, that gives bailouts to millionaires but demands payment of medical debt and educational debt, we're doing it wrong. In a system built on injustice, our truly just actions are going to look unfair, y'all. They're going to look unjust, like forgiving debts, and not just the ones owed to us, but the ones owed to others. To a system built on injustice, we should look like dishonest stewards. We should be predatory givers. We should be ready to break all the rules of engagement and propriety because those rules are rigged, y'all. And because that's what it looks like to serve God. Jesus invites us to turn our aspirations upside down, to examine whose rules we are playing by, to find our morality, our sense of justice in God's kingdom, where the poor are prioritized and lifted up and depended on, where we find our security in friendships, not hierarchies, in friendships with each other and with our neighbors and with strangers, rather than in service to those who are above us in some bullshit cultural hierarchy that has convinced us it is just the way things are, right? Beloveds, naivete and passivity are not Christian values. Naivete and passivity are not Christian values. Jesus wants us to be shrewd, to be wise, and to join in Luke's and Jesus' vision of upending the existing order of things. So may we find our moral anchor, our needle on the compass of justice, always pointing us back down to the good of our neighbors, to the flourishing of all people, not just the few. Who knows? We might just find our own salvation there. Amen.